Special thanks to T-Pain Cat for the review code. Subscribe. Warning. This video may or may not contain spoilers. I'm not sure yet, but I'm putting this here because it's funny. Now, if you watched my video covering FNAF's impact on horror, then you may remember at the end of the video, a thing that I was really upset about is how FNAF basically fed into the mascot horror genre it indirectly helped create. And I thought that that really sucked. You went from a franchise that me and countless other players can say is one of the scariest games we've ever played, to Verbal Ace's furry fetish. I was genuinely worried like hell that FNAF would go down the same route as those games, but thankfully I was wrong, because not long after the release of FNAF Security Breach, we've gotten its free DLC Ruin, which, not being nearly as good as the original games in the series, you can definitely see they were trying to return back to its roots with this game. And after that, we got the sequel to the beloved VR entry to this franchise, Help Wanted 2. And from what I've heard people say, they actually really love this game too. And another game that just seemingly came out of nowhere was a little game called Five Nights at Freddy's Into the Pit. Originally being revealed at Guerrilla Collective 2024, this pixel art style game set in the FNAF universe immediately caught my eye for completely shallow reasons, of course. Paul Robertson is one of my favorite pixel art artists. But the tone and gameplay style seemed more akin to older style survival horror games like Silent Hill and Resident Evil, only this time with a higher emphasis on avoiding this yellow fursuit instead of fighting it head on. But if you're anything like me, then you might be thinking to yourself, this seems like a random departure from the main games in the series. Who is this kid? Where does this game take place in the timeline? Why is Spring Bonnie into Vor? All of these questions would just burn into my skull, and I needed to get to the bottom of it. So digging a little bit deeper to try and find out what Into the Pit was, it opened up an entire different can of worms. So allow me to explain what I mean. So with the franchise as big as FNAF, I think it's safe to say that it spanned throughout all different forms of media. Obviously through the games, YouTube videos, music, and a thing that I shudder to even think about: books. Yes, with the franchise as lore-rich as Five Nights at Freddy's, it is ripe for adaptations into novels and fan fictions, whether it takes place in the main continuity of the franchise or a completely different story within the universe of the games. And fuck me, FNAF has got a shit ton of different books. If going off of what the FNAF wiki is saying, there's a total of 72 books set in the FNAF universe. Now, just for reference, that's more books than Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, not so much Star Wars, but still, a game franchise that primarily makes you sit in one spot hoping that you're not going to become part of someone's DeviantArt fetish. Being able to span so many different written media is definitely commendable. And while scouring throughout this extensive list of reading material that may or may not have caused its fair share of deforestation, you'll stumble upon it. Fazbear Frights Volume 1, Into the Pit. And yes, this book seems to be the first volume into an entire franchise in and of itself. But apparently, according to a lot of people, this is a fan favorite book amongst the FNAF community. And if it's worthy enough to be adapted into a video game, then I guess that all kind of makes sense, right? So before we actually get into what the book is, let's talk about the game's devs. The game was both developed and published by Mega Cat Studios, who I will forever continue to make fun of because their splash screen sounded like if a cat stepped on an auto-tune machine. But regardless, these guys were responsible for making a shit ton of games, most of which I've never heard of before, but looking on their website, they at least made 2 licensed games, being from Monopoly and Power Rangers respectively. And they've worked with some pretty massive names like Razer, Sanrio, Mattel, Hasbro, Dell, Nickelodeon, Head Up Games, and Universal. So these guys definitely have a track record. And looking at those 2 licensed games that they made, looking at some of their original works, like this one here, Sacred Line 1, it seems like they do have an affinity for some unique art styles in their games, and it seems like they've dipped into the realm of horror before. So I at the very least think that this game was in good hands. And hey, judging on what a lot of creators of the platform have to say about it, I'd say that they did a pretty damn good job. But we're not here to give them ad revenue. No, you clicked on this video to hear my thoughts. So let me not waste any more of your time, and let's take a plunge into the ball pit so I can tell you why I think FNAF Into the Pit is amazing. Now for this video, I think I want to try something different for once. I already gave you a spoiler warning at the beginning of the video, so if you don't want to watch the story, skip to this timestamp or click off the video now so that I don't end up ruining anything for you. But if you do that, please don't. I'll be lonely. Don't leave me with these guys. But any case, yes, this will be the very first official, freakishly long plot summary. I don't really tend to do that for a lot of these games because generally I don't care, but since this game is based off of a book, I think it nailing the story is going to be one of the most important things. So here we go. The game starts with you, a boy named Oswald, busy living out his dreams of becoming a Twitter artist by drawing characters who we should be very familiar with at this point. But for Oswald, they don't seem to have any correlations to the characters that we love, and the kid wishes that something interesting would happen for a change. His dad calls him down as it's time for them to go somewhere, and in the car, he and his dad share a little exchange talking about the destination his dad is taking him to, as well as some insight into the family and the place where they live. Apparently, Oswald lives in a shithole, a town that's pretty much gone into a downward spiral ever since its mill closed down. Oswald's family seems to be one of those that got hit the hardest by this because they can barely scrape by with what they make. Oswald's dad works part-time at a store hoping to make it full-time, and his mother works long hours as a nurse at the hospital, meaning that Oswald barely ever gets to see her. Oswald wonders why they just can't move away, but it would seem the reason behind this being that his grandmother is extremely frail, so that's not an option, suggesting that they should put her in bubble wrap. His dad jokingly scoffs this off with a laugh. Perhaps this child is unaware of the process of airlifting. Any case, during summer vacation, since the family isn't really capable of affording to go on one, Oswald's dad drops him off at a place called Jeff's Pizza, because the pizza there is pretty cheap and it's a place for Oswald to hang out until his dad comes to fetch him. But apparently Jeff's Pizza is just as big of a shithole as the rest of the town. But it's probably the only place that Oswald can really hang out. Upon getting dropped off at the place, some time passes where Oswald's dad is late picking him up for what seems to be a few times up until this point. After hearing about a secret ball pit in the pizzeria, Oswald chooses to investigate. After finding it, Oswald thinks it's a good idea to prank his dad by hiding in the pit as to teach him a lesson for leaving him in such a creepy place like this. After jumping into the ball pit that is probably filled to the brim with dust and rat shit, once he decides to come up for air, he's met with a surprisingly full room of kids celebrating and playing. Obviously being confused by this, Oswald chooses to investigate further. After leaving the room, we get to see a pretty enhanced and full pizzeria. And moving to the right of the place, we get to see the cast of characters that we're oh so familiar with, but Oswald has no idea of, aside from them looking like characters he drew in his sketchbook. Moving throughout the pizzeria, we meet these two kids called Mike and Chip. Kids who Oswald ends up making friends with, but not without the overwhelming sense of confusion. After a game of skee ball with Mike and Chip, the first of which I lost because fuck pixel physics, the kids then decide to play a game of tag, another game of which I miserably failed, because I guess all of the pizza Oswald's been munching is starting to have an impact on his running. After that, the kids then decide to play a game of hide and seek, and after Oswald finds the stupidest fucking place to hide, I'm pretty sure he hasn't seen what happens when you die in the first FNAF game. After Mike finds Chip and leaves the room, the power cuts and then we see our first proper look at Spring Bonnie, as we need to hold our breath to make sure the little shit doesn't find us. After he leaves, all hell breaks loose. The pizzeria erupts into chaos, filled with screams of terror from both adults and children. Oswald decides to investigate to make sure Mike and Chip are alright, and during the panic he sees the animatronics from earlier seem a lot less friendly than when we first arrived. And then after exploring and finding an unlocked door, there he is. Some people just got erect. After him beckoning Oswald to follow him, and for whatever reason Oswald decides to follow him, you know, it kind of contradicts the fact that we were clearly trying to hide from him a few seconds ago. We open the door only to be met with the bodies of 5 dead children, and Spring Bonnie all ready to lunge at us. Fuck you! After running and hiding from the rabbit, we make our escape to the one place that actually transported us to this alternate version of Jeff's Pizza, and that's back to the ball pit. After re-emerging, we're met with Jeff and Oswald's dad waiting for him there, and after his dad comes to reprimand him from hiding, the furry pounces. We think our dad is done for, but we're able to pull him back out. Or so we think. Yeah, in reality, for whatever reason, the rabbit was able to possess Oswald's father, but only he seems to realize it. After the rabbit drives Oswald home, it's here where we need to sneak around the house in order to call Oswald's mother, so she can come and see what's up with his dad. After doing so, and his mom returning home to see that Oswald's dad is completely fine to her, but clearly we and Oswald can see that's definitely not the case, after that we effectively properly start the game. So before I continue onwards with the plot, let's talk a little bit about the entire gameplay loop of Into the Pit. Now, true to the series' namesake, the game takes place over a series of 5 nights, but also 5 days. Ooh, I don't think you expected that, right? Sadly, I don't think that name would have rolled off the tongue quite so nicely. And during these daytime sections, this is where the game primarily decides to flesh out more of the game's world to give you some breathing room before you decide to tackle the nights. And once nighttime hits, much like how nights are handled in Dying Light, this is where shit officially hits the fan. Nights can primarily be broken down into 2 primary sections. First off is trying to escape the house from Oswald's fursuit-wearing father because his son is just unaccepting to his dad's new hobby, and as a result his father needs to get rid of him before he spills the beans. And the other section being to head back into Freddy's to try and locate where his father might have gone. But things aren't quite that simple, because when you head back to the pizzeria on night 2, you'll be met with sort of a puzzle before you can complete your mission. At the beginning of night 2, you have this child stuck in an animatronic suit, and we're set with the task of trying to free them. And in order to do that, we're going to need to get a screwdriver, but since there is no way of accessing the supply room, we seem shit out of luck. Until you realize that we're in an alternate version of Jeff's Pizza, so maybe things that exist in the present day could be used in the past. So this is also one of the biggest aspects to the game, jumping through time using the ball pit to complete puzzles. Like in night 2, in order to get the screwdriver, we need to go back to the present day to get the key from Jeff so we can open up the supply room. But before that, we need to drop some trash off at the mill in order to get it. Once we complete that task, Jeff hands us the key and we can go back in time through the ball pit to unlock the room, nabbing us the screwdriver. After rescuing the kid, we ask them if they've seen our father, they say no, and just as the conversation ends, Rule 34's second favorite rabbit pops out and we need to escape using the ball pit to end the night. And that's pretty much the entire gameplay loop of Into the Pit. We start out during the daytime so we can get more of the world and characters fleshed out, only for nighttime to fall where we need to escape the house first through ever-changing means, and then head back to the pizzeria to try and gather more clues as to where Oswald's dad is and to save whatever child got themselves into whatever mess the game chose for them. But as you can see, this is a horror game after all, so just running around stage to stage completing puzzles isn't always going to be the name of the game. For you see, while you're safe during the daytime, free to explore areas and interact with NPCs to your heart's content, at night, this is where a lot more of the game's horror elements gets introduced. Firstly, the whole goal is to not get grabbed by your vor-loving father, so in order to do this, you're going to need to avoid him at all costs. And how you do this is by simply listening carefully during the nights, because you'll hear all sorts of different stuff like doors opening, footsteps, you know, all sorts of shit like that. But when you accidentally fuck up and he sees you, this is where you need to start acting like you're the biggest Sonic fan and book your ass out of there as quickly as possible. But don't think that just running from room to room is going to be enough to get your ass away from the rabbit. No, you're going to need to find a place to hide, each of which comes with its own different mini-game that you're going to need to complete in order to successfully avoid capture. Like climbing into a closet, you need to shift yourself from the rabbit's view so you don't get seen. If you hide in chests, you need to swat away spiders, same if you hide in a vent. And if for whatever reason you think it's actually a good idea to hide from your pursuer in the same thing that gives you a game over screen in previous games, you just need to hold your breath until this prick decides he's seen enough. One of the most unreliable hiding places though are under tables, because unless you were able to hide underneath them while the rabbit was like 2 rooms behind you, more often than not, this hiding spot is just more of a way for you to stun the guy, giving you a huge burst of speed so you can book it to a better hiding spot. But hiding under the tables tends to come with a huge caveat. After you complete Jeff's quest, if sending a 6th grader out to an abandoned mill in a shithole town all on his own seemed like a tad bit cruel, he at the very least gives you a flashlight for your troubles. This is where one of the game's primary sources of survival horror comes into the picture. You see, at random points during the night at the pizzeria, the lights will just randomly shut off, forcing you to need to restart them at the breaker box over here. And in these moments, you're going to need to use your flashlight in order to light your way. Or if you actually know what the layout of the place is, this flashlight is going to mean as much to you as a contestant in a Mr. Beast video. But you're going to need to use the flashlight in order to stun the rabbit when you hide under the tables, because this is the only way you're going to be able to stun him when things go to shit. But why this doesn't always work is that in order to keep your flashlight on, you're going to need to look both during the past and present for batteries, because if you don't have any when he decides to look under the table, Yeah, that's a no-no if you couldn't tell. And the other thing that I feel like I should mention, but I just decided to leave it for last because I, for the life of me, didn't really pay all too much attention to it, is the sound meter here at the bottom right-hand side of the screen. Yes, much like how you're able to hear the rabbit skulking around the pizzeria and in your house, he can also hear you. And by doing certain things like running, disturbing certain other characters I'll get to in just a bit, and interacting with certain objects, you can increase the noise meter. And I guess I don't need to explain this to you, but the louder you are, the more likely the rabbit is gonna know where to find you. But you're also able to use that to your advantage by interacting with other objects in the environment, so you're able to lure him to a different room. But this aspect kind of feels a little bit undercooked, because I was sprinting all over the place and that didn't really seem to do all that much to create enough noise that would cause the rabbit to find me. But if you've also paid attention to what I just said, you'll also notice that I mentioned you can also raise the noise meter by disturbing other characters. Yes, as the nights progress, you're going to run into the other animatronics during the night, all of which you're going to need to first get by through completing a puzzle. And all of them seem to be more of a threat in concept only. Chica just basically acts like a loud bitch, luring the rabbit to wherever you are, Bonnie being the only other threat aside from the rabbit that can kill you if you fuck up his minigame when you get caught by him, and Freddy... I genuinely can't remember at all. I think he forgets the series is named after him. So yeah, basically they just act as little nuisances you need to avoid so that you don't get caught by the rabbit. Pretty basic shit. But now that I've discussed everything regarding the gameplay loop, let's head back to the plot again, shall we? Spoiler warning again, I guess. Now, after surviving 4 days and nights, on the 5th night, Oswald has finally had enough of the rabbit shit and decide that he wants his dad back. So after returning to the pizzeria and saving yet another child, Oswald is finally able to locate his dad, who seems in pretty rough shape. So after freeing him, the rabbit comes in and grabs his dad, and after pursuing them, we see that he's busy attacking his dad by the ball pit. After one minigame where Oswald beats the fuck out of the rabbit, he pulls himself and his dad through the ball pit back to the current time. And after reuniting with his father, Oswald gets pulled back through the ball pit, captured and tied up by the rabbit, and then the game ends. What? Did you expect there to be a happy ending? Well, you'd be right. Much like any other good horror game, FNAF Into the Pit contains a bunch of alternate endings. The one that I originally got being, I'd assume, either the second or first bad ending, because there's even an ending where you can run through the entrance during the night and you can just say to hell with your dad and just leave. I even got an achievement for that, ain't I special? But there are 3 other endings you're able to get, only one of which I was able to achieve, being the good ending, where you make it out with your dad and he decides it's probably for the best that you guys move from the shithole, much to the inconvenience of their grandmother. But also getting this ending makes the goat of the game, Jeff, get killed by the rabbit. And then a true ending which is more in line with the book, where both Oswald and his dad being reunited, but Oswald actually being grateful for what he has and just wants to enjoy the time he has with his dad, despite the circumstances that they live in. And another bad ending where Oswald himself gets infected. Now, I didn't get that ending or the true ending because just like any good old-fashioned FNAF game, you're going to need to complete a shit ton of mini-games and phone a hidden number in order to get it. And maybe I will do that during a live stream, but for now I've got so much other shit that I need to do, so I'm happy I was at the very least able to get 3 different endings. So with all of that stuff out of the way, I think it's time that I give you my very epic review of the game, so let's talk about all the positives and negatives. Now, as the title of this video might have given away, there's definitely a lot more positive than negative I have to say about this game, so let me get those out of the way real quick. Firstly, and this might be personal bias, but this is my video, so shut the hell up, I absolutely love the pixel art style of the game. Everything is just so stylized, it's going to ensure that this game is going to stand a test of time for many years to come. And even things like the menus being in more of a sketchbook style perfectly contrasts with the visuals of the main game. And couple that with the animations from when you get bored and also the few cutscenes that the game has where you just get to see events taking place from Oswald's eyes, it's just fucking 6 stars, man. I love it. Secondly, I just really love the way how the game expands the world outside of the main horror events from the game. It's just nice to see, you know, a world outside of the pizzeria, see other characters that have their own unique things to say, and also follow a main character that's plot just isn't fully cemented with Freddy Fazbear, and we actually get to see how his life is, his personality, his relationships with other characters in school and with his own family. There's a lot more depth here, and it's pretty damn good to follow along with an actual simple story, rather than the jumbled clusterfuck that the franchise's overall continuity is nowadays. Another thing that I absolutely absolutely adore is how they pretty much nailed the atmosphere that the original games had. When you're inside your house or at the pizzeria, you hear nothing except your character and the pursuer's footsteps, the buzz from whatever lights are still on, and all sorts of other different ambient noises. And not only that, when the game's music really picks up when you're in a chase scene, it's literally akin to games like Silent Hill, where someone just went to town on FL Studio while at a construction site. It's amazing. And there's also some auditory mindfuckery that's also included to fuck with the player. Like the ones that I noticed the most is just a baby crying. That noise has got nothing to do with the main rescuing of the kids, but on your first playthrough, you're not going to know that. How do we know how far this rabbit is willing to push the ESRB's buttons to shock you? And sometimes this atmosphere can bleed over to the visuals, because during key story moments and sometimes during gameplay, the game will just randomly cut to grotesque scenes of the animatronics during the daytime, making you really see what a toll this is having on Oswald's psyche. And during the nighttime, you'll even get these jump scare moments and some horrific images of the rabbit that'll just flash on screen for a split second to try and catch you off guard. Also, the choice to limit your control over the camera is also brilliant, because with the other animatronics wandering around the pizzeria and later nights, sometimes if you're completely careless, you might not know something's there until it's too late. Everything about this game's mechanics and overall atmosphere and sound is just brilliant, and given where FNAF went a couple of years back, I'm really glad to see that this is the direction they took with this game. But now, with all of the positives out of the way, time to farm hate views. Now, for as much praise as I give this game, I do feel that certain things that got introduced into the game that seemed like it'd play a pretty huge part in it is just completely undercooked, like the noise meter as well as the flashlight. Never during my entire playthrough have I ever made enough noise unless I used one of the noise makers in the game. Have I ever caused enough myself to get me into deep shit that caused me to try and be extra quiet. And the flashlight just became more of a defensive tool, because when you know what the layout of each room is, then there's no real point in trying to illuminate your surroundings. Another thing that I really fucking hated in this game is how stingy some checkpoints ended up being. I noticed this mostly at the end of the game and when I tried replaying the game on a higher difficulty. Oftentimes when you fuck up, you aren't just started back in the ball pit room or any other location in the pizzeria. No, sometimes the game expects you to do an entire run back just to get back to where you were. Like in the end of the game. You can't obviously restart back at the ball pit room because of what happens in the story, but fucking hell, making me need to run all the way back from Oswald's house, pick the pizzeria, needing to interact with the door first so you can learn it's locked, talking to Jeff to get the key, and then running back to the room is just super annoying. And I think that might be one of my biggest complaints, but we're far from done here actually, because one of the biggest issues I've had with this game is that I just don't think it's all that scary. Now, I definitely have my praise for how well they were able to capture the horror atmosphere of the original games, but the game taking a more free-roam approach to games like Outlast and even older-style Resident Evil games, this game presented problems for itself I was extremely worried about and talked about in my FNAF 10 Years Later video. With the ability to freely roam around the map and can get yourself out of a pinch if you hide in a closet or whatever's closest to you, that leads to your pursuer's AI becoming extremely exploitable. Like in a few instances during my playthrough, if the prick just so happened to not be staring in my immediate direction, I could just follow him without him realizing I was there. So who's actually chasing who now, you pro? But aside from all those gripes that in all honesty could just be a me exclusive problem, the game just does everything else way too good for those things to be a major turnoff for me. So I gotta say, I 100% recommend that you go out and give Five Nights at Freddy's Into the Pit a go. And I gotta congratulate this seemingly random studio for pulling off something so well on their first go with this franchise. And hey, since this game was so good and it's based off of a series of books, why not let us see what Mega Cat can cook up with in the future by adapting some of the other entries in this series? But until we get to see that, try not to get bored.